The red and blue lights painted the deserted suburban road, masking the quiet dignity of the man behind the wheel of the silver sedan. Officer Travis Braxton leaned against the driver's window, a cruel smirk playing on his lips as he tapped his heavy flashlight against the glass. "Out here, buddy. I don't care what your little plastic card says," Braxton sneered, his chest puffed out with arrogant authority. "I'm the law here." The older black man simply adjusted his glasses, his voice dangerously calm. "No, officer," he replied softly. "I am the law, and your career is finished." The night air in Westlake was crisp, the kind of late October chill that kept the affluent suburban streets completely barren by 11 o'clock. Arthur Pendleton loved this quiet. At 58, he was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders from 9 to 5, dispensing rulings that altered the course of massive corporations, organized crime syndicates, and corrupt public officials. But tonight, he wasn't wearing his heavy black robes. He was just a father, wearing a faded grey college sweatshirt and soft denim jeans, driving his meticulously maintained 2018 Mercedes E-Class back home after helping his pregnant daughter assemble a crib. Arthur drove with the exact precision he applied to every aspect of his life. 2 hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, speedometer hovering exactly at the 35 miles per hour limit. He was listening to a low-volume jazz broadcast, his mind already drifting toward the warm bed and the cup of chamomile tea waiting for him at home. He never saw the cruiser tucked behind the thick oak trees near the intersection of Elm and Prescott. Inside that cruiser sat Officer Travis Braxton, a 7-year veteran of the Westlake Police Department whose personnel file was as thick as a phone book, brimming with excessive force complaints and racial profiling accusations that had all miraculously disappeared thanks to a highly cooperative police union. Beside him was Officer Kevin Russo, a rookie barely 6 months out of the academy, still idealistic enough to feel a knot in his stomach every time Braxton decided to go hunting. "Look at this guy," Braxton muttered, his eyes narrowing as Arthur's silver Mercedes glided past the intersection. "Rolling through a neighborhood like this at 11? In that car?" "He was doing the limit, Travis," Russo said hesitantly, his eyes on the radar gun, which read a perfect 35. "Plates are clean. Registration is current." He tapped his brakes too hard. Braxton lied effortlessly, throwing the cruiser into drive. Suspicious driving. Probably casing the joint, or he stole the ride. "Let's light him up." Before Russo could protest, the deafening wail of the siren shattered the suburban silence, and the cruiser's light bar exploded into a blinding strobe of red and blue. Arthur saw the lights in his rearview mirror and sighed softly. He didn't panic. He had been a black man in America long before he was ever appointed to the federal bench by the President of the United States. He knew the drill. He engaged his right turn signal, pulled smoothly over to the shoulder beneath a flickering streetlight, shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his window. He placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel, his fingers clearly visible in the ambient light. The crunch of heavy boots on the gravel shoulder announced Braxton's approach. The officer didn't walk. He swaggered. His right hand was already resting casually on the butt of his service weapon, an intimidation tactic Arthur recognized instantly. Russo hung back near the rear quarter panel of the Mercedes, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Braxton stopped at the window, shining his high-beam tactical flashlight directly into Arthur's eyes. "Evening," Arthur said, his voice even, betraying no emotion. "Is there a problem, officer? License, registration, and proof of insurance?" "Now," Braxton barked, deliberately ignoring Arthur's question. "I have my wallet in my back right pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment," Arthur stated calmly, turning his head slightly to avoid the blinding beam of the flashlight. "I'm going to reach for them now. Is that acceptable?" "Stop talking and hand it over," Braxton snapped, Moving slowly and deliberately, Arthur retrieved his leather wallet. He pulled out his driver's license and his insurance card, handing them through the window. He did not pull out his federal identification credentials. He had always believed in facing the world as a citizen first, never using his badge to skirt the law. If he had committed a traffic infraction, he would pay the ticket. Braxton snatched the cards from Arthur's fingers. He shined the light on the license, then back at Arthur's face. "Arthur Pendleton, you're a long way from home, Arthur. What are you doing in Westlake?" "I was visiting my daughter," Arthur replied, "and I believe I asked you why I was pulled over." Braxton leaned in closer, bringing his face inches from the window. Arthur could smell stale coffee and peppermint gum. "You swerved, Arthur. You crossed the double yellow line. You look intoxicated to me." "Have you been drinking?" "I haven't had a drop of alcohol in 15 years, Arthur said, his tone dropping an octave, taking on the resonant, commanding timbre he used in his courtroom. "And my vehicle possesses lane assist technology. It is physically impossible for me to have crossed the double yellow line without an audible alarm sounding, which did not happen. You have made a pretextual stop without reasonable suspicion." Braxton's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to people using legal terminology on the side of a dark road. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. The absolute lack of fear in Arthur's eyes infuriated him. "Oh, we got a roadside lawyer here," Braxton mocked, looking back at Russo and laughing harshly. "Step out of the vehicle, Arthur." "Under what legal authority?" Arthur asked, his grip on the steering wheel remaining loose but firm. "You have my identification. If you intend to issue a citation for a traffic violation, please write it. Otherwise, I am free to go." "I said step out of the damn car!" Braxton roared, his hand leaving his gun and grabbing the handle of Arthur's door. Finding it locked, he slammed his fist violently against the roof of the Mercedes. "Unlock this door right now, or I'm smashing the window and dragging you out. You are interfering with a lawful investigation." Arthur took a slow, deep breath. He knew the law. He knew Pennsylvania versus Mims gave officers the right to order a driver out of the vehicle. To resist physically would only give this unstable officer the excuse he was clearly begging for. "I am complying," Arthur said, pressing the unlock button. "But I want to state for the record that I am doing so under duress, and I am not consenting to any searches of my person or my vehicle." "I don't care about your consent," Braxton sneered as he yanked the door open. The moment Arthur's feet touched the pavement, Braxton grabbed him roughly by the shoulder of his sweatshirt and spun him around, slamming his chest against the side of the Mercedes. The metal was cold against Arthur's cheek. Out of the corner of his eye, Arthur saw Rookie Officer Russo take a panicked step forward. "Travis, hey, take it easy," Russo stammered. "He's complying." "Shut up, Kevin. I handle my stops my way," Braxton barked. He kicked Arthur's legs apart, far wider than necessary, nearly causing the older man to lose his balance. Braxton's hands aggressively patted down Arthur's pockets. "Got any weapons on you, Arthur? Any needles that are going to poke me?" "I am unarmed," Arthur said, his voice muffled against the car. The indignity of the moment washed over him, but his mind remained entirely analytical. He was cataloguing every Fourth Amendment violation, every breach of departmental protocol, every civil rights infraction. He was building a case. Braxton's hands found the leather wallet Arthur had placed back in his pocket. Without asking permission, Braxton pulled it out and tossed it onto the trunk of the car. Then, with violent swiftness, Braxton grabbed Arthur's wrists, wrenched them behind his back, and clamped heavy steel handcuffs onto them. He squeezed the cuffs shut tightly, the metal biting painfully into Arthur's skin. "Officer Braxton," Arthur said clearly, having read the name tag during the initial approach. "I am officially advising you that these cuffs are too tight and are causing injury. Furthermore, you have placed me under arrest without reading me my Miranda rights. nor have you established probable cause for this detainment." Braxton let out a barking laugh. "You watch too much TV, old man. You're not under arrest. You're being detained for officer safety because you're acting aggressively." "I have not moved a muscle," Arthur noted calmly. "Stay facing the car," Braxton ordered. He walked back to the trunk and flipped open Arthur's wallet. "Let's see who we're really dealing with here. Probably got a warrant out of Chicago." Russo walked up beside Braxton, his face pale in the flashing police lights. He looked from the handcuffed man leaning against the car to the wallet in Braxton's hands. Braxton thumbed through the credit cards, ignoring the cash. "Let's see here. Country club card. Pretentious. What's this?" Braxton's thick fingers paused. Behind a leather flap, normally kept hidden from casual view, was a heavy, gold-plated shield. Next to it was a laminated identification card bearing the seal of the United States government. Russo leaned in to get a better look. The young rookie's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He read the heavy black lettering on the credential. United States District Court Arthur Pendleton. Chief Judge, Federal District. The blood rushed out of Russo's head so fast he felt dizzy. He looked at the quiet man in the faded sweatshirt leaning against the car. Then he looked at Braxton. "Travis," Russo whispered, his voice trembling violently. "Travis, look at the badge." Braxton scoffed, though a flicker of hesitation crossed his eyes. He pulled the badge holder out into the light. He stared at the words. Chief Judge. He stared at the federal seal for a terrifying, silent 10 seconds. The only sound on the side of the road was the rhythmic clicking of the police cruiser's hazard lights. Then, cognitive dissonance took over. Braxton's ego, inflated by years of unchecked power in his small suburban fiefdom, simply refused to process the reality of what he was holding. He couldn't have just violently assaulted and illegally detained a federal judge. Therefore, he hadn't. "It's a fake," Braxton declared, his voice louder than necessary, trying to convince himself. "You can buy this garbage on the internet for $50. Guys buy them to try and get out of speeding tickets." "Travis, look at the holographic seal," Russo pleaded, his voice cracking. "That's not a fake. Look at the watermarks. Oh my God. Travis, take the cuffs off him. Take them off right now." "Shut up, Kevin," Braxton snapped, his face turning red. He stomped over to Arthur, grabbing him by the shoulder and spinning him around to face the street. Braxton shoved the federal ID directly into Arthur's face. "Where do you get this, huh? You think flashing a fake tin makes you special? Impersonating a federal officer is a felony, you idiot." Arthur stood tall, despite his hands being bound behind his back. The night air was cold, but his dark eyes burned with an intense, unyielding fire. He looked directly into Braxton's soul, stripping away the uniform, the gun, and the badge, seeing only a frightened, pathetic bully. "I am not impersonating anyone," Arthur said. His voice was no longer just calm. It was the voice of a man who commanded courtrooms, who handed down life sentences, who held the power of the United States Constitution in his pen. "I am Chief Judge Arthur Pendleton of the United States District Court. I was appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and I have federal jurisdiction over this entire state. You have engaged in an illegal traffic stop. You have assaulted me. You have violated my civil rights, and you have illegally seized my property." Arthur paused, letting the silence hang before delivering the final blow. "I am giving you one chance, Officer Braxton. Remove these cuffs, return my property, and give me your badge number. If you do, I will ensure your prosecution is handled fairly." Braxton's mind short-circuited. The sheer authority radiating from Arthur was terrifying, but Braxton was too far gone. If he backed down now, he was admitting defeat. He pushed his chest out, leaning in close to Arthur. "Out here, buddy. I don't care what your little plastic card says," Braxton sneered, pointing a finger into Arthur's chest. "I'm the law here. You're under arrest for impersonating a federal official, resisting arrest, and driving under the influence. "No, officer," Arthur replied softly, his face an unreadable mask of iron. "I am the law, and your career is finished. Get in the damn car!" Braxton shoved Arthur roughly toward the back of the cruiser. He forced the older man down into the hard plastic seat, slamming the door shut with a heavy thud. Russo stood frozen on the street, staring at the silver Mercedes. He felt like he was watching a train completely derail in slow motion, and he was strapped to the front engine. "Travis," Russo whispered as Braxton walked past him. "You just ended our lives. Get in the car, Kevin," Braxton growled, though a cold sweat had broken out on the back of his neck. "He's a fake. You'll see. He's just a loudmouth with a fake badge. We're taking him to the station." The Westlake Police Department was a modern, brick-faced building nestled next to the town hall. At 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, the precinct was usually dead quiet. A few officers doing paperwork, a janitor buffing the floors, and Sergeant Tom O'Malley manning the front desk, counting down the minutes until his shift ended, so he could go home and watch old westerns. The double-glass doors violently swung open, letting in a gust of cold autumn air. Officer Braxton marched in, his hand firmly gripping Arthur's bicep, practically dragging him toward the booking desk. Officer Russo trailed behind them, walking like a man marching to his own execution. "Hey, Sarge," Braxton called out, his voice loud and artificially cheerful. "Got a live one for you. Resisting suspected DUI, and wait till you see this, impersonating a federal officer." Sergeant O'Malley, a 20-year veteran with a receding hairline and a gut that tested the limits of his uniform buttons, looked up from his computer monitor. He pushed his reading glasses down his nose and looked at the prisoner. Arthur Pendleton stood quietly at the booking desk. His sweatshirt was bunched up, his wrists still tightly cuffed behind his back. Despite his disheveled appearance, his posture was immaculate. He did not look at the floor. He looked directly at the sergeant. "Impersonating?" O'Malley grunted, standing up and walking over to the counter. "What did he do? Flash a fake FBI badge to get out of a ticket?" "Better," Braxton smirked, slamming Arthur's wallet down onto the heavy counter. "He's claiming he's a federal judge. Chief judge, no less. Had the fake badge and everything." O'Malley chuckled dryly. He reached out and picked up the wallet. "Well, that's a new one. Usually they just say they know the mayor." O'Malley flipped the wallet open. He looked at the gold shield. He looked at the federal identification card. The silence in the precinct lobby was sudden and absolute. Sergeant O'Malley had been around a long time. He had handled federal transfers. He had been to the federal courthouse in the city. He knew what a real credential looked like. He knew the specific microprinting on the edges. He knew the holographic seal of the Department of Justice. His eyes slowly rose from the ID card to the man standing in handcuffs. He recognized him. He had seen Arthur Pendleton on the evening news just 3 months ago, giving a press conference after handing down a massive racketeering conviction. The color drained from Sergeant O'Malley's face so rapidly that Russo thought the older man might actually have a heart attack. The sergeant's hand began to shake, the heavy leather wallet trembling against the countertop. "Sarge?" Braxton asked, his smug smile faltering slightly as he noticed the sergeant's reaction. "It's a good fake, right? Fooled Kevin out there, too." O'Malley didn't look at Braxton. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the chief judge of the federal district, who was currently bleeding slightly from where the steel cuffs had cut into his wrists. "Judge Pendleton," O'Malley whispered, his voice cracking. It was barely audible. "Good evening, Sergeant," Arthur replied, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I would shake your hand, but as you can see, I am somewhat indisposed." "Oh my God," O'Malley breathed. He scrambled around the desk, his keys already jingling in his hand. He practically shoved Braxton out of the way. "Judge, I am so... Jesus Christ. Turn around, sir. Let me get these off you." "Hey, whoa!" Braxton protested, stepping forward. "Sarge, what are you doing? He's my prisoner. The badge is a fake." "Shut your mouth, Braxton," O'Malley roared, a vein bulging in his forehead. He unlocked the cuffs with trembling hands. The steel clicked open, and Arthur slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing the deep, angry red indentations on his wrists. "Sarge, he's a—" "I said shut up!" O'Malley screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling finger at Braxton. "Do you have any idea who this is? Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Braxton blinked, looking from O'Malley to Arthur, the terrifying reality finally beginning to breach the thick walls of his arrogance. He swerved," Braxton stammered, his bravado rapidly deflating. Arthur adjusted his sweatshirt, then looked at his bleeding wrists. He looked up at Sergeant O'Malley. "Sergeant," Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I require 3 things immediately. First, I want the name and badge number of this officer and his partner. Second, I want my personal effects returned to me. And third, I want you to wake up your chief of police and tell him to get down here." "Yes, Your Honor. Right away, Your Honor," O'Malley stammered, rushing back behind the desk. He grabbed a first aid kit and pushed it across the counter. "Sir, please, sit down. Let me get you some water. I am so terribly sorry about this." "The apology is noted, Sergeant, but it is not yours to make," Arthur said. He turned to look at Braxton. Braxton had backed up against the wall. His face was the color of chalk. The adrenaline that had fueled his ego on the side of the road had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, suffocating terror. He looked at Russo, who was standing by the door with his hands covering his face, quietly weeping. You're really a judge?" Braxton whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Arthur didn't answer him directly. He walked over to the wooden bench in the holding area and sat down gracefully, crossing his legs. He looked at Braxton with the exact same expression he used when sentencing men to federal penitentiaries. "Sergeant," Arthur called out, his eyes never leaving Braxton. "Before you call your chief, I need to make a phone call." "Of course, Your Honor," O'Malley said, desperately dialing the chief's home number. "Do you need me to call an attorney for you?" "I don't need an attorney, Sergeant," Arthur said, his voice cold as ice. "I need the special agent in charge of the FBI field office, because as of this moment, your precinct is under federal investigation." The precinct lobby felt like a vacuum, all the oxygen sucked out by the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic error that had just occurred. Arthur Pendleton dialed a number on his cell phone, returned to him promptly by a trembling Sergeant O'Malley, and held it to his ear. The silence in the room was so absolute that Braxton could faintly hear the ringing from the earpiece. "Richard," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a professional, clipped cadence. "It's Arthur Pendleton. I need you to mobilize a civil rights response team to the Westlake Police Department. Yes, right now. I have just been the victim of an illegal detention, assault, and false arrest under color of law by an officer Travis Braxton. Secure the premises, Richard. I want all dashcam footage, bodycam footage, and dispatch audio preserved before anyone in this building has a chance to hit the delete key." Arthur paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "I am uninjured, save for some lacerations on my wrists. Just get your people here." He ended the call and placed the phone carefully on his lap. He did not look at Braxton. He didn't need to. The officer was visibly disintegrating against the cinder block wall. 20 minutes later, the screech of tires outside signaled the arrival of Chief William Harrison. The chief of the Westlake Police Department burst through the double doors, looking as though he had aged 10 years during the short drive from his home. He was wearing hastily donned uniform trousers and a civilian windbreaker zipped up to his chin, his thinning grey hair sticking up in erratic tufts. Harrison's eyes frantically scanned the lobby, skipping past his desk sergeant and the 2 patrolmen, landing immediately on the dignified black man sitting on the holding bench. "Judge Pendleton!" Chief Harrison gasped, practically sprinting across the linoleum floor. He stopped a few feet away, his hands hovering awkwardly, as if he wanted to offer a handshake, but knew he had absolutely no right to do so. "Your Honor, I cannot begin to express the depths of my horror. I was awoken by Sergeant O'Malley and I drove straight here. Are you okay? Do you need a paramedic?" "I am fine, Chief Harrison," Arthur replied, his tone polite but entirely devoid of warmth. "Though I cannot say the same for the constitutional integrity of your department." Harrison swallowed hard, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Braxton. The panic in the chief's face was instantly replaced by a volcanic rage. "Braxton!" Harrison growled, his voice vibrating with suppressed fury. "What in the name of God have you done?" Braxton pushed himself off the wall, his survival instincts kicking in. He fell back on the only defense he knew, the blue wall of silence and the habitual twisting of facts. "Chief, listen to me. It's not what it looks like. He was driving erratically. He crossed the double yellow on Elm. When I pulled him over, he was belligerent. He refused lawful orders to exit the vehicle. He resisted being cuffed, and he was acting aggressively. I had no idea who he was. He just flashed a badge, and I thought it was a fake. You know how many fakes we get around here." Chief Harrison looked back at Arthur. The judge simply sat there, watching Braxton's desperate performance with the detached interest of an entomologist observing a dying insect. "Is that true, Your Honor?" Harrison asked, his voice trembling. "Chief Harrison," Arthur said smoothly, "my vehicle is equipped with lane-keeping assist and a digital telemetry recorder. It will mathematically prove I never deviated from the center of my lane. I complied with every physical command given to me, despite the stop being entirely pretextual. I was dragged from my vehicle and assaulted." Arthur's eyes shifted slightly to the young rookie standing in the corner. "But you do not need to take my word for it. You have a witness. Officer Russo." Every eye in the room snapped to the young rookie. Russo flinched as if he had been struck. He looked at Braxton, whose eyes were wide, silently pleading, silently threatening. "Stick to the story. Back me up. You're a cop, I'm a cop." Russo looked at his training officer, the man who had taught him how to falsify probable cause, how to target minorities passing through their affluent town, how to be a bully with a badge. Then he looked at the federal judge, a man radiating absolute, unshakable integrity. "Kevin," Braxton said, his voice carrying a dark, desperate edge. "Tell the chief what happened. Tell him how erratic the suspect was acting." Russo took a deep breath. The tears that had been welling in his eyes spilled over, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was surprisingly steady. "He was doing exactly the speed limit, Chief," Russo said. "Kevin, shut up!" Braxton yelled, taking a step toward the rookie. "Stand down, Braxton," Chief Harrison roared, putting his hand on his own service weapon. "Go on, Russo." "The judge was doing the speed limit," Russo continued, his words spilling out in a rapid, cathartic confession. "He didn't cross the yellow line. Travis just saw a black man driving a late-model Mercedes in a rich neighborhood and decided he wanted to mess with him. The judge was completely polite. He handed over his ID. Travis ripped him out of the car, slammed him against the door, and cuffed him for no reason. When the judge showed his federal ID, Travis called it a fake and threw him in the back of the cruiser. I told him to stop, Chief. I swear to God, I told him to look at the badge. He wouldn't listen. Braxton lunged. "You little rat!" he screamed. He didn't make it 2 steps. Sergeant O'Malley had already cleared the booking desk and tackled Braxton from the side, slamming the heavy-set officer face first into the linoleum floor. Chief Harrison was on him a second later, planting his knee firmly into the small of Braxton's back. "Don't you move! Don't you twitch!" Harrison bellowed. He reached down and violently yanked Braxton's service weapon from its holster, tossing it sliding across the floor. He then ripped the radio and the badge from Braxton's uniform shirt. Travis Braxton, you are stripped of your police powers, effective immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending a criminal investigation." "You can't do this!" Braxton shouted into the floor, his cheek squished against the cold tile. "The union will have my job back by Monday. He was resisting. It's my word against his." "Actually, it isn't." A new, booming voice echoed from the front doors. Everyone froze. Standing in the entryway, flanked by 4 men and 2 women wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI, was Special Agent in Charge Richard Caldwell. He was a towering, broad-shouldered man with a closely cropped military haircut and eyes like shattered glass. "It's not your word against his, Mr. Braxton," Caldwell said, stepping into the precinct, "because the FBI has already pulled the cloud-uploaded footage from your cruiser's dash cam. We watched the whole thing on the drive over, and spoiler alert, you're going to federal prison. The arrival of the Federal Bureau of Investigation transformed the Westlake Police Precinct from a local stronghold into a federal crime scene in a matter of seconds. Agents fanned out with practiced, terrifying efficiency. 2 agents immediately stepped behind the booking desk, gently but firmly moving Sergeant O'Malley aside to secure the computer terminals and hard drives. Another agent moved toward the server room to lock down all digital communications, emails, and dispatch logs. SAC Richard Caldwell walked straight toward Arthur Pendleton. The towering FBI agent stopped in front of the seated judge and offered his hand. "Arthur, good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances," Caldwell said, his voice softening with genuine respect. "Richard," Arthur replied, accepting the handshake and finally standing up. "Your response time is commendable. When a chief judge calls and says he's been abducted by a local badge, we tend to break the speed limit," Caldwell said, his eyes dropping to the angry red welts and dried blood on Arthur's wrists. Caldwell's jaw muscle twitched. He turned his gaze toward Braxton, who was now being hauled to his feet by Chief Harrison and an FBI agent. Braxton looked completely broken. The swagger, the sneer, the arrogant presumption of absolute authority. It had all been violently stripped away, leaving behind a terrified, trembling man who finally understood the catastrophic scale of his mistake. "Agent Caldwell," Chief Harrison said, his voice shaky, "I want to assure you, the Westlake Police Department will cooperate fully. This officer went rogue. This is not how we operate." Caldwell looked down at the chief. "We'll see about that, Chief Harrison, because my agents aren't just here for tonight's footage. We are executing a federal preservation order on every personnel file, use of force report, and citizen complaint this department has filed in the last 10 years. Harrison blanched. 10 years? Sir, with respect, this is an isolated incident. It is never an isolated incident. Arthur Pendleton's voice cut through the room, silencing the chief. The judge stepped forward, his presence commanding the space entirely. He looked at Braxton, then at the chief. A police officer does not wake up one morning after 7 years on the job and suddenly decide to violently assault a compliant motorist and ignore a federal credential. This level of brazen corruption is practiced. It is normalized. It is tolerated by a system that looks the other way. Arthur walked slowly toward Braxton. The disgraced cop couldn't meet his eyes, staring instead at the tips of Arthur's shoes. "You told me on the side of the road that you were the law," Arthur said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a thunderclap. "You relied on the darkness, your badge, and my skin color to act as a tyrant. You assumed I was a man without a voice. How many others, Mr. Braxton? How many other men and women have you dragged out of their cars in the dark? How many lives have you ruined because they didn't have a gold shield in their wallet to stop you?" Braxton trembled, a solitary tear cutting a path down his sweaty cheek. I made a mistake," he whispered. Yes, you did, Arthur agreed softly. But your mistake was not pulling me over. Your mistake was believing that the badge you wore made you unaccountable to the Constitution you swore to protect. Arthur turned to Caldwell. Richard, what are the preliminary charges? Deprivation of rights under color of law, a direct violation of 18 U.S. Code, Section 242, Caldwell recited smoothly. False imprisonment, assault, and we'll be looking into adding falsifying official records and evidence tampering, depending on what we find in his patrol car. Caldwell gestured to his agents. Cuff him. Agent Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy, federal-issue handcuffs from her belt. Travis Braxton, put your hands behind your back. Braxton complied numbly. The sharp click-click of the ratcheting steel echoed off the cinder-block walls, a sound he had inflicted on countless others, now sealing his own fate. Wait! Braxton choked out, as Jenkins tightened the cuffs. He looked desperately at Arthur. Judge, please. I have a wife. I have 2 little girls. If I go to federal prison, a cop in federal lockup, they'll kill me. Please, Your Honor. Have mercy. Arthur Pendleton looked at the weeping man. His expression did not change. There was no malice in his eyes, but there was no pity either. There was only the cold, unyielding scale of justice. The courtroom is the venue for mercy, Mr. Braxton, Arthur said quietly. Tonight, you face the law. Take him to the holding cell, Caldwell ordered. He can sit exactly where he planned to put the judge until the federal transport van gets here. Jenkins and another agent marched Braxton across the lobby. The heavy iron bars of the holding cell slid open with a screech of metal. They pushed Braxton inside and slammed the door shut. The loud clang seemed to finalize the destruction of his life. Braxton collapsed onto the wooden bench, buried his face in his manacled hands, and began to sob uncontrollably. Arthur watched him for a moment, then turned his attention to Rookie Officer Russo, who was still standing by the door, pale and shivering. Officer Russo, Arthur said. Russo snapped to attention. Yes, Your Honor. You did not stop him, Arthur said, his voice analytical. But you did attempt to intervene, and you did not lie when questioned by your superior. In a culture that demands complicity, you chose the truth. Remember that choice. Let it guide the rest of your career, because the moment you forget it, you end up in that cage. I will, Your Honor. I promise you, Russo breathed, looking like a man who had just been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Arthur nodded once. He turned back to the FBI special agent in charge. I am going home, Richard. My tea is cold, and my daughter will be calling me in the morning. We'll have an agent drive you, Arthur, Caldwell said gently. Your car is being brought here by a tow truck. We'll hold it securely overnight so you can pick it up tomorrow. Thank you, Arthur said. He buttoned his faded college sweatshirt, smoothed the wrinkles from his jeans, and walked out the double-glass doors into the cool October night, leaving the shattered remnants of a corrupt empire burning in his wake. By 6 a.m. the following morning, the story had not merely broken, it had shattered the pristine, manicured illusion of Westlake. The local news affiliates had picked up the police scanner chatter from the night before, and by dawn, a fleet of satellite trucks was parked outside the brick facade of the Westlake Police Department. Inside his spacious, mahogany-paneled chambers at the federal courthouse, Chief Judge Arthur Pendleton sat quietly at his desk, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. He watched the muted television screen on his wall, where a frantic reporter was standing in the morning drizzle, gesturing wildly at the precinct doors. The chyron across the bottom of the screen read in bold, glaring letters, Suburban cop arrests federal judge, FBI raids police headquarters. Arthur felt no joy in the spectacle. He felt only a profound, heavy sorrow. He knew that for every corrupt officer caught in the blinding light of federal scrutiny, there were countless others operating in the dark, destroying the lives of people who did not possess the armor of a judicial title. The immediate fallout was catastrophic for the Westlake Police Department. Special Agent Richard Caldwell had not made an idle threat. By noon, a convoy of dark SUVs had arrived at the precinct. A dozen FBI agents in windbreakers marched through the front doors, presenting a sweeping federal warrant that authorized the seizure of every computer server, filing cabinet, and disciplinary record housed in the building. But the institution of corrupt policing rarely surrenders without a vicious fight. Gregory Pierce, the pugnacious, red-faced president of the Regional Police Benevolent Association, decided that the only way to save the union's reputation and to protect the lucrative pension fund was to go on the offensive. Pierce hired a high-priced crisis management firm and called an emergency press conference on the steps of the town hall. "What we have here is a gross overreaction by the federal government," Pierce bellowed into a cluster of microphones, his jaw set in aggressive defiance. "Officer Travis Braxton is a decorated 7-year veteran of this department. He made a routine, lawful traffic stop in the dark. The driver was uncooperative and combative. When a piece of plastic was flashed in the dark, Officer Braxton reasonably believed it was a counterfeit, a common tactic used by criminals to evade arrest. Instead of complying like an ordinary citizen, Judge Pendleton used his immense political power to ruin a working-class cop. This is a political witch hunt." The strategy was clear. Smear the judge, muddy the waters, and cast Braxton as the working-class victim of an elitist federal system. It was a tactic that might have worked had they been dealing with a normal political scandal. But they were dealing with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and more importantly, they were dealing with the truth. The twist that destroyed Pierce's smear campaign came from the most unlikely of sources: rookie officer Kevin Russo. Following the press conference, Pierce and Westlake's patrol lieutenant, Michael Gallagher, pulled Russo into an unmarked car behind a local diner. They spent 45 minutes heavily implying that if Russo did not amend his official statement to reflect that Judge Pendleton had been aggressively resisting arrest, Russo's career in law enforcement would be over, and his physical safety on the streets could no longer be guaranteed by his fellow officers. "You back the blue, Kevin, or the blue turns its back on you," Pierce had growled, jabbing a thick finger into Russo's chest. "You say the judge swung his elbow at Travis. You say you saw it. Do we understand each other?" Russo had nodded, trembling. He agreed to change his statement. What Pierce and Lieutenant Gallagher did not know was that prior to arriving at the diner, Russo had spent 3 hours sitting in an interrogation room with Special Agent Caldwell. Driven by the memory of the dignified judge standing in the precinct, reminding him to choose the truth, Russo had voluntarily allowed the FBI to tape a concealed recording device to his chest. Less than 24 hours after Pierce's defiant press conference, the FBI executed simultaneous arrest warrants. Lieutenant Gallagher was arrested in his driveway while taking out the trash. Gregory Pierce was placed in handcuffs in the middle of a crowded steakhouse. Both men were charged with witness tampering, extortion, and obstruction of a federal civil rights investigation. When the audio of Pierce threatening Russo was leaked to the regional newspapers, the blue wall of silence in Westlake didn't just crack, it pulverized into dust. Facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for the cover-up, Lieutenant Gallagher broke immediately. In exchange for a plea deal, Gallagher handed over a hidden ledger he kept in a personal safe. The ledger detailed years of coordinated, racially motivated traffic stops designed to seize cash and property under civil asset forfeiture laws, schemes that Officer Braxton had been heavily involved in. Braxton's defense attorney, a slick criminal lawyer named Thomas Langford, visited his client in the federal holding facility. Braxton was no longer the arrogant bully who had swaggered down the highway. His hair was greasy, his eyes were sunken with dark bags, and he had lost 15 pounds. Langford slid the plea offer across the steel table. "It's over, Travis. The union president is indicted. Your lieutenant gave up the forfeiture ledger. Russo wore a wire. They have the dash cam, the body cam, and the judge's car telemetry. If we go to trial, they will annihilate us. You will get 20 to 25 years." Braxton stared at the paper, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold it. What are they offering? "If you plead guilty to the civil rights violations and false imprisonment, and allocute to your role in the forfeiture ring," Langford said grimly, "they'll cap the sentencing recommendation at 10 years. But you have to take it now. Tomorrow, the offer goes up to 15. Braxton closed his eyes, a choked sob escaping his throat. The invincible shield he had worn for 7 years was gone. He picked up the pen, his tears splashing onto the legal document, and signed his life away. 8 months after the flashing lights had pierced the quiet Westlake night, the sprawling courtroom of the United States District Court in Chicago was packed to its maximum occupancy. Reporters, civil rights advocates, off-duty police officers, and curious citizens filled the wooden pews, the air thick with tense anticipation. Because the victim of the crime was the chief judge of the district, the Federal Circuit had appointed a visiting judge to preside over the sentencing to ensure absolute impartiality. The Honorable Margaret Whitmore, a notoriously stern jurist from the Southern District of New York, sat high on the bench, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. At the defense table sat Travis Braxton. He was dressed in a standard-issue, oversized orange jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound in heavy transport chains. The metal clinked loudly against the wooden table every time he shifted his weight. He looked entirely defeated, a hollow shell of the man who had once declared himself the law. Attorney Thomas Langford stood to deliver his final plea for mitigation. "Your Honor," Langford began, his voice solemn, "my client stands before you, a broken man. He has lost his career, his pension, his reputation, and his freedom. He has a wife and 2 young daughters who will now grow up with their father behind bars. Officer Braxton made a terrible, grievous error in judgment that night. He allowed his implicit biases and the toxic culture of his department to cloud his duty. But he is not a monster. He is a flawed human being who has taken responsibility by pleading guilty. We ask the court to consider the statutory minimum of 5 years, allowing him a chance at eventual rehabilitation." Judge Whitmore remained impassive, jotting a note on her legal pad. She looked over the rims of her glasses to the prosecution table. "Does the government wish to speak?" she asked. Special Agent Caldwell, sitting in the gallery behind the prosecutors, leaned forward. The lead federal prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the government yields its time to the victim for his impact statement." A hush fell over the massive courtroom. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the chamber swung open, and Arthur Pendleton walked down the center aisle. He was not wearing his judicial robes today. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a deep maroon tie. He walked with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who carried the truth in his marrow. Arthur approached the wooden podium facing the judge's bench. He adjusted the microphone. He did not look at Braxton. "May it please the court," Arthur's voice resonated through the room, deep and commanding, instantly silencing any murmurs from the gallery. "I have spent 30 years in the pursuit of the law. I have prosecuted cartels, and I have sentenced corrupt politicians. I have always believed in the sanctity of the badge and the profound, sacred trust we place in the men and women who wear it." Arthur paused, resting his hands on the edges of the podium. "But on that night in October, I was not Chief Judge Pendleton. I was merely an older black man driving in a neighborhood where Officer Travis Braxton believed I didn't belong. In those terrifying moments on the side of the road, I was violently stripped of my dignity, my rights, and my humanity. I was treated not as a citizen, but as subjugated prey. Arthur slowly turned his head, his piercing gaze falling upon the man in the orange jumpsuit. Braxton flinched, shrinking down into his chair, unable to meet the judge's eyes. "Mr. Langford argues that his client made a mistake," Arthur continued, turning back to Judge Whitmore. "But cruelty is never a mistake. Cruelty is a choice. Handcuffing a compliant man until he bleeds is a choice. Ignoring a federal credential out of sheer arrogance is a choice. Officer Braxton operated under the profound delusion that the law was a weapon he owned, rather than a master he served." Arthur's voice swelled, filling the cavernous space. "I survived that night because I possessed a gold shield and a title that forced the system to correct itself. But, Your Honor, my heart breaks for the thousands of men and women who do not have a federal badge in their wallet. The people who are pulled over in the dark, who are degraded, assaulted, or worse, and whose voices are silenced by a system that blindly protects its own. If this court grants leniency today, it sends a message to every corrupt officer in this country that their uniform is a shield against justice." Arthur stood perfectly still. "I ask this court to impose the maximum sentence recommended by the plea agreement, not for vengeance, but to remind every citizen of this nation that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law." Arthur stepped away from the podium and walked back up the aisle in total, unbroken silence. Judge Whitmore steepled her fingers, looking down at Braxton. The silence stretched for a full, agonizing minute. "Mr. Braxton, please stand," Judge Whitmore commanded. Braxton struggled to his feet, the chains around his ankles clanking loudly, echoing like church bells in the quiet room. "The fundamental foundation of our republic," Judge Whitmore said, her voice dripping with icy condemnation, "is that the state holds a monopoly on violence, and in exchange, the agents of the state are held to the highest possible standard of constitutional conduct. You took an oath to protect the public. Instead, you acted as a predatory tyrant." She picked up a heavy stack of papers, the pre-sentencing report. "You abused your power to terrorize a citizen because of the color of his skin, completely unaware that you had grabbed a tiger by the tail," she continued. "Your defense claims this was an isolated lapse in judgment, but the federal investigation into your precinct has revealed a staggering pattern of bigotry, theft, and extortion, all of which you willingly participated in. You are a disgrace to the badge, a disgrace to your department, and a danger to the civil liberties of the American people." Judge Whitmore picked up her wooden gavel. "Travis Braxton, it is the judgment of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 108 months. 9 years. This sentence is to be served without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, you are barred from ever seeking employment in law enforcement, private security, or public office for the remainder of your natural life." Crack! The gavel struck the sounding block. The sound was as final as a tombstone slamming shut. Braxton's knees buckled. If it weren't for the 2 federal marshals grabbing him by the armpits, he would have collapsed entirely to the floor. He was sobbing openly now, the devastating reality of his new life washing over him in a suffocating wave. He was dragged out of the courtroom through a side door, his chains rattling all the way into the holding cells below. Months later, the town of Westlake looked largely the same on the surface. The lawns were still perfectly manicured, the oak trees still lined Elm Street, and the suburban quiet still settled over the neighborhoods at night. But beneath the surface, the earth had shifted. Chief Harrison had been forced into early, disgraced retirement. The Westlake Police Department was now operating under a strict federal consent decree, overseen directly by the Department of Justice. Every cruiser was equipped with tamper-proof cameras, every officer underwent intensive constitutional training, and a civilian oversight board reviewed every use-of-force complaint. Kevin Russo was no longer a rookie. He had been promoted to a field training officer, tasked with ensuring that the new recruits coming through the academy understood that true courage wasn't about dominating citizens, but about having the moral fortitude to police their own. Late one evening in November, Arthur Pendleton was driving his Mercedes E-Class back from his daughter's house. His new grandson had just been born, and the judge was exhausted, but deeply happy. He drove with his hands exactly at 10 and 2. The speedometer hovered right at the 35 miles per hour limit. As he passed the intersection of Elm and Prescott, he saw a police cruiser parked beneath the heavy oak trees. The cruiser did not pull out. The lights did not flash. Arthur drove past it in peace, the quiet jazz playing softly through the speakers. He looked in his rearview mirror at the fading silhouette of the police car, a faint, satisfied smile touching the corners of his mouth. The law had finally come to Westlake, and it was there to stay. The line between authority and tyranny is razor thin, and it takes immense courage to hold those in power accountable. Judge Arthur Pendleton's story is a powerful reminder that true justice isn't about the badge you wear, but the integrity you uphold. No one is above the law, and the truth will always find its way into the light. If this incredible true life story of justice, accountability,